everyone for joining us today on our webinar, Designing Quality and Competitive 48C Projects. This is hosted by the BlueGreen Alliance and the Rocky Mountain Institute, and we also have participation from Evergreen Action. I'm Jasmine Mossbarger, the Communications Manager at the BlueGreen Alliance, and I am assisted right now by Ted Furtick, Vice President of Manufacturing and Industrial Policy. Together, we will be facilitating this discussion in the background. Today, you will hear from our experts at BGA, RMI, and Evergreen Action on the 48C Advanced Energy Project Tax Credit and how you can create a competitive application. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the BlueGreen Alliance YouTube channel for later viewing. We will also send an email after this webinar to all of the attendees with a presentation, with the presentations and the resources that we share today. Each of our panelists will speak between 5 and 15 minutes, followed by a Q&A session, which will be moderated by Elisa Peterson. And questions can be submitted using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will be collecting questions throughout the webinar, so feel free to submit them as you think of them. All attendees are muted and off video to eliminate distractions. Now I'll turn it over to Elisa Peterson.
Thanks, Jasmine, and welcome everyone to part 2 of the 2-part webinar series on 48C. For those of you that didn't attend the first part of the webinar series, that was pretty much just an overview of 48C, and I will quickly give that overview right up front so that we're all able to participate in part 2, which is how to design an effective application for 48C. In order to do that, I've got a great crew of panelists with me today. We'll hear from Lachlan from RMI, who's going to share a little bit about a new tool on identifying good places to do manufacturing. Then we'll hear from Matea from Evergreen, who will talk about how to successfully design projects in energy communities. And then we'll end with Tom from BlueGreen Alliance, who will talk about how to develop successful workforce and community engagement plans, as well as thinking about financing for these types of projects. So to get started, if we could go to the next slide, I'll just share a quick overview of 48C. That first webinar, if you weren't able to attend, was also recorded. So if after these 2 slides that I present, you're like, I need a little bit more context, we will put the link to the webinar recording in the chat. So we're talking about 48C today, which is a manufacturing investment tax credit. It is 30%, it can cover 30% of project investment, assuming prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are met. If they're not met, it covers 6% of the project cost. The reason we're meeting now is because the second round of funding just opened up May 22nd, and that round of funding is for $6 billion. So unlike normal tax credits, this is not, this is a cap tax credit. There's $10 billion total for 48C through IRA. Treasury already allocated $4 billion of this. And so, if you're doing the math, that means that this is kind of the remaining amount available for 48C. So there's a chance more funding will be made available at some point, but for now, this is kind of like the last opportunity to get funding for these types of projects. What's interesting about this is that they do want 40% of funding to go towards energy communities. That was actually in the legislative text, so it's mandated that 40% goes to energy communities. And then the other kind of interesting update for 48C is that if you're a non-taxable entity, so like a state or a city, you're eligible for direct pay to claim this tax credit. And if you are a for-profit or essentially a business, which most of you probably are, it is available for transferability. So what is this tax credit? It covers 3 different things. The first is clean energy manufacturing and recycling projects. So if you're building a new heat pump manufacturing plant, this would be covered under that. The second pot of funding is for industrial decarbonization projects. So again, sticking with the heat pump example, if you install an industrial heat pump in your facility and it reduces greenhouse gas emissions by 20%, it would qualify for this. And then finally, critical materials projects. Let's go to the next slide to talk a little bit about timeline. So we are at the concept paper time. This opened up May 22nd and is closing June 21st, so very quickly. What's important to know about the concept paper is that it's not super intensive to fill out. We just put the concept paper template in the chat, but you do need to fill out that concept paper in order to be able to submit a full application. Even if you submit a concept paper and DOE does not invite you to submit a full application, you can submit a full application. But if you don't submit a concept paper, you are not able to submit a full application. So I think there's something to be said there about making sure that you are set up to apply for this. The full application timing will likely take place in the summer of 2024. They normally have about 50 days to put in that full application, and then they're planning to announce award winners no later than January 15th. So now is kind of the moment. This is why we're focused on this topic right now, to get those concept papers in. And so we'll be talking about kind of how to make your concept paper strong and eventually your full application strong. So with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague Lachlan. Thank you.
Thanks, Elisa. So I wanted to talk briefly about clean energy manufacturing in general, where we are, how 48C sits within that context, and then briefly introduce a new tool that we're releasing at RMI called the Clean Growth Tool that will hopefully help regions, economic development organizations, even potential project developers think about which sectors to focus on and how to prioritize this process within a broader economic development strategy. So first, I think it's important to recognize that 48C sits within this pretty broad suite of industrial policy from the Biden administration, this government that covers the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation, and even the CHIPS. And as you can see here in this red box, 48C is an important but just one piece within that that broader industrial strategy, and all these pieces are meant to sort of interlock and complement one another. And it's worth thinking about, how does 48C, what role does that specifically play? But what we've seen, partially as a result of this industrial strategy, is a pretty extraordinary sort of outburst of clean energy manufacturing investments across the country. You can see that in this map on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, you can see, if you look at growth in cumulative investments since passage of the IRA in August 2022, which sectors have really just taken off as a result of, partially in a result of that bill. And you can see that a lot of manufacturing sectors, some of which are covered under 48C, are experiencing pretty unprecedented growth at this period in time. And we're starting to see this translate into the macro statistics as well. If you sort of zoom out to the entire manufacturing sector, you can see manufacturing construction on the left-hand side skyrocketing. A big part of this is obviously the chips and science incentives for semiconductors, but clean energy manufacturing, 48C related sectors are a big part of this too. And in private fixed investment, on the right-hand side, you can see that manufacturing is taking off, where other sectors in the economy are remaining, relatively flat. So, kind of zooming in a little bit to, well, where are these manufacturing investments taking place? So on the left here, you can see the economic areas, which is a measure of sort of aggregation of a metro area and its surrounding rural counties. You can see the economic areas in the country that have seen the most clean energy manufacturing announcements relative to their local GDP. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a map visualizing that across the whole country. And what we really see, and this is unsurprising to anybody reading the news, is we've got all these investments happening along what's called the Battery Belt, from Michigan sort of down through Kentucky, Tennessee, a huge sort of cluster developing in the southeast, particularly around South Carolina and Georgia, and then a lot of action as well happening on the Gulf Coast and in the southwest, in Texas, also to an extent in Arizona, also the Reno Sparks area of Nevada. And if we sort of zoom in, particularly on 48C related sectors, and look at specialization, so this is a measure of employment in 48C related sectors relative to the national average, you can see which parts of the country is sort of already specialized in the type of sectors that are likely to be able to access 48C funding. Apologies. Again, we have the top sort of most specialized economic areas in this left-hand chart, and then a map showing every economic area in the country. And again, you can see pretty similar parts of the country stand out in terms of existing specialization, but also some areas that weren't in the previous chart. So there are clearly these related industries that are sort of primed and ready, I think, to apply to some of this funding. If we look at more recent data, so the last couple of quarters on employment growth in 48C related sectors, left-hand chart, this is from the quarterly survey of employment and wages. You can see clean hydrogen, pretty extraordinary growth in employment in that industry. And that's the entire industrial gas manufacturing industry, a lot of which we think is being driven by hydrogen investments. And then show existing specialization as of Q4 2023 in 48C related industries. And what you can see there is different parts of the country clearly have these specializations, these areas in which they're more likely to sort of be working and applying in for the 48C application process. And again, if we break it down in terms of clean energy investment, what you see on this map on the right-hand side, these are the largest investments within these economic areas in 48C priority technologies as related to us by the Department of Energy. And so this is another indicator of sort of which parts of the country are kind of poised to compete and to apply in different sectors. And a lot of this won't be especially surprising. We see battery investments in the upper Midwest. We see a lot of solar, supply chain investments around Atlanta, around Denver and Dallas. And then, of course, a lot of hydrogen and carbon management investments along the Gulf Coast. But finally, I wanted to introduce our new clean growth tool. The tool is being released either this week or next, and so it's still sort of in an embargoed form here. But just to kind of give you a sense of what's in it and how it might be useful in this process, what we've done is crosswalk every next industry in the country to their relevant clean energy industry. And so here you can see, you can pick just about any clean energy industry in the country. And then what it does is identify what's called industry feasibility for every region. And so what that means is it takes co-location data to be able to identify implicit economic strengths and capabilities across the country and use that to predict a particular region's ability to transition into a new industry. So if industries A, B, and C typically co-locate alongside one another, and your region currently has a strong presence of industries A and B, that suggests you're more likely to be able to transition into C. And the reason this is important is that if the US is to be competitive, if it's to really drive economic development in these emerging clean tech sectors, it needs to do it in the most competitive, the most specialized parts of the country. And this tool gives us the ability to start to think about not only which sectors we need to prioritize, but where makes sense to for those investments to take place in a way that maximizes their chance of being competitive on the global stage, and also maximizes the chance that the local supply chains, the local economic ecosystems that surround those investments can experience the most amount of job growth, of indirect benefits from those investments. And so what the tool allows you to do is to dig into a specific region. Here you have a screenshot of the tool showing the Detroit area, for example, and it gives you a list of all the clean energy industries that it predicts is sort of most feasible for a given region, the share of good jobs within those particular industries, and then you can also explore workforce development opportunities. And so this gives a sense of which specific occupations are maybe underrepresented in a given region in order to compete within that sector. And so in the context of 48C, you can use this tool to identify the 48C related industries that you're looking at, how feasible those industries are for a given region, and perhaps the workforce development areas that need to be focused on in order to fully compete in those sectors. And so what we see when we run that analysis specifically to 48C related industries, so this map, for instance, shows feasibility to compete in low carbon iron and steel. You can see these are the economic areas of the country that show up as being the most feasible based on their existing related industries and therefore their implicit economic capabilities. And so you can see here that we have a whole bunch of different industries that you could choose from. And on the right-hand side, you see some of the most feasible industry region sort of combinations across the country, as well as both within those sectors. And again, the share of good jobs, which is whether those industries pay above local median wages and include healthcare and other benefits. So that's the Clean Growth tool. Please feel free to reach out to us offline if you think this is a useful resource and you'd like to explore it further. As I say, coming out this week or next, and hopefully as a useful tool to inform analysis from an economic development perspective and a long-run competitiveness perspective. And then I'm now going to pass off to my colleague at Evergreen.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lachlan. What a fantastic tool from RMI, and really excited for its release. Good afternoon, folks, and it's really great to be here with you all. I'm Matija Mrkosic, and I'm a senior policy lead at Evergreen Action. If this is the first time that we're crossing paths, Evergreen Action is a national climate organization, and we're really committed to fighting for a thriving, just, and inclusive clean energy economy. So a big part of that work is equipping manufacturers with the tools they need to leverage these IRA tax credits to get ready for the green industrial transformation. And at the same time, we want to make sure that these IRA tax credits, like 48C, are benefiting the communities and the workers that have been overburdened by pollution for far too long. So by the end of our 10 minutes together, I'm hoping we'll be able to answer these three questions. 1, what are energy communities? 2, why should manufacturers cite projects in energy communities? And 3, how can manufacturers make sure that energy communities are meaningfully benefiting from the 48C tax credit? Sound good? Okay, we're going to dive in. And if we could skip 2 slides, please. Awesome. So first up, what are energy communities? Well, energy communities are communities that have hosted coal mines or coal-fired power plants. And for years, they've generated employment, wages, tax revenue. But for a bunch of reasons, we have widespread coal closure in recent decades. That's come with job loss. And to boot, it often comes with toxic air and water pollution that communities have been experiencing for a really long time. So the history of coal closure looms large here. And, it's a history that policymakers need to answer to, especially as the clean energy revolution gets underway across the country. Next slide, please. So that really brings us to what policymakers are doing to address this history. So for a bit of context here, when the Biden administration took office, they committed to two relevant principles. First, they essentially said that energy communities should be among the first to benefit from the clean energy transformation. And they created something called the Interagency Working Group for Coal and Power Plant Communities and Economic Vitalization to basically support this economic revitalization. The second thing they did is they created something called the Justice 40 Initiative, which is this government-wide commitment to saying at least 40% of the overall benefits from federal climate spending, like, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act, should flow to disadvantaged communities. And that's why kind of dotted throughout the IRA, you'll see special funding for energy communities. The goal here is basically to drive benefits like job creation and environmental remediation into these communities. Next slide, please. So, of course, there are no surprises here that there is a carve-out for energy communities in the 48C tax credit. So when Congress passed the IRA 2 years ago, it essentially reinvigorated the existing 48C tax credit and gave it, $10 billion for advanced energy projects. But they did something interesting. They added this equitable catch, which is that at least 40% of the tax credit allocations have to go to projects that are located in energy communities. Now, as you probably know, the Department of Energy has already allocated $4 billion worth of the 48C tax credits in the first round, but there's still $6 billion up for grabs in round 2. And of course, if you do a little bit of math here, that includes at least $2.5 billion to be allocated to 48C designated energy community census tracts. And if you're thinking, that sounds like a very official term with some T's and C's, you would be right. So the Department of Energy, next slide, please, has a very specific definition of what makes a 48C energy community census tract. So let's unpack this together. Essentially, DOE says that you have to pass 2 very specific tests to be an energy community census tract. The first one is that you need to have a history of coal closure. So essentially, DOE wants to make sure that it's driving benefits to communities where coal closures happened relatively recently, as you'll see here. So this includes either a census tract that has closed after December 31st, 1999, a coal-fired electric generating unit that has been retired after December 31st, 2009, or I'm seeing that one thing has been left out on this slide, a census tract which directly adjoins any of these census tracts. So those are kind of the 3 criteria here for test 1. For test number 2, it's basically if your census tract has received a 48C tax allocation prior to the date of the IRA's enactment, your project unfortunately will not be eligible for the carve-out allocation. And this will only apply to a small group of census tracts. To our knowledge, basically DOE has helpfully omitted these few census tracts from the official lists, but happy to answer questions about that later. Next slide, please. So the next question you might have is, okay, are there any resources out there that will help me figure out if my project is an energy community or not? And fortunately, there are a bunch of them. So if you want a quick glance, the Department of Energy has created this map, which it has on its website and also on the energycommunities.gov website, which lays out kind of a bunch of different energy community census tracts. They recently updated it with data from April 1st this year, and they also added 130 new tracts. So it's definitely worth getting in there to check if anything has changed. The other thing that I'll add is that the official guidance from DOE says that you actually need to look at this official list, which you see in this white box here. And that is on an IRS notice that we will link in the chat later. You have to go through digit FIPS code. Happy to explain what this is as well at the end, and then compare it to the official DOE list. And if your tract appears, great, is eligible for the 48C Energy Communities Census Tract. Next slide, please. All right, so you've done your due diligence and you've determined that your project is a 48C Energy Community Census Tract. Now let's just take a second to reinforce why manufacturers should cite their projects in energy communities. So there's a bunch of reasons here. Number one is that, 48C is a huge discount to get ahead of the curve. It can help you retool your industrial manufacturing operations to stay competitive in a clean energy economy. Number two is that energy communities often have existing infrastructure from coal or other industries that can help support a manufacturer's capabilities. Equally, energy communities also have this long history of skilled workforces that, manufacturers can draw upon. I'll also add that with the 40% carve out for energies, projects cited in these communities do have a better odds of getting allocated a tax credit in round 2. Something that Elisa pointed out in the previous webinar was that in round 1, DOE didn't actually meet the full 40% allocation for energy communities. I think they only gave away around 37.5, meaning there was actually an additional 100 million left over for energy communities. And that demonstrates that there's a huge opportunity for manufacturers who want to put forward an ambitious application cited in energy communities in round 2. Next slide, please. All right, so you already know that your project qualifies and that you want to apply. What's next? So you want to put together a feasible but ambitious concept paper before June 21st. The concept paper, as Elisa said, is a brief document. It's only around 5 pages, so it's not a huge time sink. And so by putting something together, you've got nothing to lose. But at the same time, I will say that the 48C tax credit is a competitive program. So the strongest applicants will rise to the top, meaning it's important to bring your A game and ensure that your project will be a successful one that will directly benefit energy communities and workers. So how do you do this? Tom, who will be speaking right after me, will really be jumping into the concept paper and explaining, the nuts and bolts. But I wanted to underscore that citing a project in an energy community means that you should integrate a bunch of best practices here. If you look at the concept paper, there actually is a specific question about energy communities. I will flag it is a really short question. It has a character limit of 500 characters, but it essentially asks you to show that you'll support transition opportunities for workers in coal, automotive, or other energy sectors, and that use existing infrastructure. So when you're thinking about answering this question, you want to think about creating high quality jobs with good pay and benefit packages for workers. You'll also want to briefly describe how your project might be able to train and equip workers with relevant skills for this job, and ideally how you'll work with unions and organized labor on this project. Next slide, please. More broadly, across your concept paper, I would really urge you to incorporate a bunch of best practices, and I have them listed here, but very briefly, it's so important to embark on rigorous community consultation. It's important to show that you have designed a community benefits plan that will help tailor very specific needs that will be responsive to a particular local community. It's important to show that you're creating high quality jobs, that you might be able to offer training benefits, that you are able to offer prevailing wages, which allows you to access that 30%. That you're working with local unions and honoring collective bargaining agreements, which will build long-term legitimacy, and it'll be a risk mitigation against future disruption. It'll also be really important to show that you're remediating local environmental impacts and that you can ambitiously cut climate pollution and other toxic pollution. Where possible, always make sure that these plans are actionable and quantifiable. Next slide. Thanks. So that's the end of my formal remarks, but I just wanted to share a few useful resources. So I'll flag that Evergreen Action has released a blog about the 48C tax credit, which really breaks down this opportunity. I'd also like to take a second to link and shout out to the DOE Energy Communities Map, the official census tract list, which we will link into the chat shortly, as well as the Interagency Working Group Funding Clearinghouse. The Interagency Working Group, which you can find at energycommunities.gov, has cobbled together a bunch of resources showing IRA tax credits that can be stacked together to fund clean energy and manufacturing projects that are cited in energy communities. And this is something to consider as you do this work. So of course, if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch. I have listed my email here. And now I will pass it over to my colleague, Tom, at the BlueGreen Alliance.
Thanks so much. Really excited to be here today. So good afternoon. My name is Tom Lewis. I am a senior policy advisor for manufacturing and industrial policy at BlueGreen Alliance. We are a coalition uniting labor unions and environmental organizations to solve today's environmental challenges in ways that create and maintain good quality jobs. It's BGA's core belief that we shouldn't have to choose between good paying jobs and a clean environment. We can and must have both. So today you have heard speakers address multiple sections that involved with the 48C application, including such things as market demand, strengthening US supply chains, as well as energy communities. I will share a few slides from our good friends at DOE that can help with the financing section of this application related to their new manufacturing capital connector program, and then also break down the workforce and community engagement section of the concept paper application. And as we've noted, you only have about a page to work with for this application, but still it's a chance for you to showcase the outline for a strong plan when you go ahead and submit a final application. At BGA, our goal is to help support companies' efforts to develop workforce and community engagement plans that will make their 48C application stronger. It's important to remember that this funding is highly competitive. The first round, there were $44 billion worth of applications for only $4 billion. So having an application that goes above and beyond the community engagement and workforce requirements is one of the best ways to make your efforts stand out. I also encourage you all to check out our guide that we're going to be putting in the chat on successful community benefit plans. It's called Companies Succeed and Communities Benefit. It can also be found in our website. And with that, let's dig in. Okay. So as I mentioned, these slides here that I'm going to go through are from our good friends at the Department of Energy. So ensuring that you have the financing available to successfully build and operate your facility is one of the key factors that will determine whether or not your project is awarded funding through 48C. The 48C tax credit is a 30% ITC, but it's not received until it's commercially operating. This means that companies need to secure 100% of private sector capital to bring the project to commercial operation. Additionally, at least 40%, as we've noted, will be in energy communities, which are areas where historically capital has not flowed. Manufacturers there are small and medium-sized businesses that may not have had financing available in the speed and scale needed that understand the criticality of the project to the clean energy supply chain. Also, there is significant overlap between the information that DOE requires and a loan application, and this overlap can be leveraged to reduce the burden on applicants. Next slide, please. So given all this, DOE is setting up the Manufacturing Capital Connector, or MCC for short. It's an initiative to connect manufacturing applicants with a wide range of capital providers to facilitate the investment necessary to build out the US manufacturing supply chain. With the MCC process, DOE is educating capital providers about their administered programs, such as 48C, the Biden administration supply chain priorities, and DOE's rigorous merit review process to help financiers understand the criticality of the selected 48C projects to the clean energy supply chain. Next slide, please. So this slide is a little bit about how the MCC will work in practice. The platform will house a list of capital providers and their best practices, which are capital providers' minimum level of consistent terms, such as the types of capital, for instance, debt, equity, tax credit monetization, as well as minimum and maximum check size or term sheet response time. At their own election, companies may use that list to send application information directly to capital providers based on the best practices they find most appealing. The MCC platform is going to be available during the full application process. Applicants can reflect this in their application narrative with letters of support and intent as attachments. And if any companies have further questions on the MCC, you can reach out to me and I will connect you with the team at DOE who is creating this platform. All right, and we can go to the next slide, please. Awesome. So now it's a chance for us to dig in a little bit more, as I mentioned, on the workforce and community engagement plan section of the 48C application. Next slide, please. So before we start that, I just wanted to really give an outline of 4 key things that BGA recommends for a company submitting a community benefit plan for any federal funding. If you do these 4 things, we find that you will put together a successful community benefit plan that will make your application stronger. So they are engage the community and labor, invest in your workforce, advance diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and then implement Justice 40, as we heard about a little bit earlier. The number one most important thing, though, that I feel like I want to share with you all today is the importance of early and proactive engagement. I really can't stress this enough. But if you get on the ground early while you're doing this, you're going to find this whole process much easier. And it's just going to increase trust upon all parties involved in putting together your workforce and community engagement plan. Next slide, please. So the plan itself has 4 parts. We talked about project location, which is really about energy communities. I'm going to focus on those next 3 parts, which are job creation and workforce continuity, ensuring timely project completion through workforce community engagement, and then local environmental impacts. Next slide, please. So the first part is the job creation and workforce continuity plan. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to first say the question that's directly in the application. I'm going to give you 4 high-level recommendations, and then the slide after this is going to deal with best practices for dealing with this section. So first, the application asks the applicant to describe the extent to which the project will secure job quality, examples in wages, benefits, health and safety at the workplace, and a formative support of collective bargaining. So for this, there's 4 recommendations I have, which are to first, it's most straightforward, which is estimate the number of direct and indirect jobs created through the project, both in the construction and the manufacturing operation stage. Then you're going to want to report if you have any collective bargaining agreements or other labor management partnerships. But also you're going to want to show how you commit to providing quality jobs through this process. Third, you need to describe your workforce development initiatives and also the ways that you train and reach underrepresented workers, especially significant in energy communities. And then 4, demonstrate that your employees have the ability to organize, bargain collectively, and participate in labor organizations of their choosing. All right, next slide, please. So these are just a couple of best practices when you're working on this part of the plan. So there's 3 key things you're going to want to focus on here. That's job quality, job access, and workers' rights. For job quality, as I mentioned, showcasing that you have a collective bargaining agreement in place or you're willing to come to one and work with unions is a key part of this section. But also you want to detail wages, things like following Davis-Bacon Act during the construction phase. But also, are you willing to give your workforce living wages? All things that you can talk about in this section. Also a full rundown of benefits, looking at retirement, health, paid time off, bonuses, all of those things, the things that can make your company more competitive and your application more competitive. And then also health and safety plans. So if you look over on the right-hand side, there's a few things that you want to think about when you're doing this. Obviously, that's recognition of adherence to the law, but also actions you're taking to prevent workplace violence as well as workplace harassment. And then and then any safety and health trainings that you're willing to offer for your workers, including things that you're doing with your workforce to be able to make this happen. Next, for job access, this is where you could talk about establishing registered apprenticeship programs and pre-apprenticeship programs, different initiatives related to local hiring, and then as well as establishing a DEIA plan. All things, again, you only have a little bit of space here, but just being willing to commit to looking at those later for the full application, really important. On the last, in workers' rights, there's a few different things. Talking with local unions about labor neutrality agreement can be incredibly helpful here. And if you haven't already, DOL's, the Department of Labor's Good Jobs Initiative is a great resource for additional things here, and I really highly recommend checking it out. Next slide, please. So the second thing we're going to talk about is ensuring timely project completion through workforce and community engagement. The application asks you to describe what labor and community engagement has been completed or is planned, and then summarize any formal agreements that are planned or have been executed. So I have 3 main recommendations here. The first is to define the community. I always make this point, but you can't engage the community if you don't know who is in the community or what the community is. Then you need to describe efforts for how you intend to engage with those stakeholders, including outreach methods. I always recommend a diversity of outreach methods, things like community meetings, other one-on-one meetings, being at spaces where the community is present are all ways that you can reach multiple different parties and you're not relying on only one thing. And then you're going to want to detail how you intend to work with the community moving forward. Benefit plan? Are you setting up a committee of community members who can help hold the party accountable to the community benefit plan, things like that. And then also how you plan to reach legally binding agreements, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. And we can go to the next slide, please. So best practices for this section, there's really two things here, and that's measurable actions that you can take for community engagement. As I mentioned, completing a demographic assessment of your community should be the first thing that you look at when doing this, as well as conducting stakeholder mapping. This is the opportunity to look at the community and identify things like economic development organizations, all parties that are here currently, but also local governments, unions, other community-based organizations, all parties that you can reach out to help you work on this plan. Writing a community needs assessment is key after these two things have been completed, and then completing an impact analysis on your project and how it impacts the community. Our second recommendation here is reaching legal agreements. These are really a best practice in the community benefit plans. These are things like project labor agreements during the construction phase, community workforce, community benefit agreements that I'm going to touch on here in a little bit, as well as what we talked about, collective bargaining agreements. So a community benefit agreement is a legally binding agreement between a company, a coalition of community members, and a union that's going to detail specific benefits for workers and communities that they get exchanged for their explicit support for a project. There's a number of ways to go about this, and every single one is going to look a little bit differently. Really what you want to just stress in the application process is that you're open to doing this. Working with economic development organization on this can be incredibly helpful as well, and just demonstrate openness to a wide range of benefits that you see listed there. There's a couple of toolkits linked here as well, and our guide has some additional resources that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. The last section that you're going to want to think about is the local environmental impacts. And this is where you're going to describe any pollutants that the project will introduce to the local community and explain what specific measurable steps the project is taking beyond compliance with environmental law to mitigate local environmental impact. The three recommendations here are you're going to want to discuss the anticipated negative and cumulative impacts of the project, including impacts to the local air, water, and land quality, and then also ways that you intend to mitigate those impacts. You want to determine if the project is part of a disadvantaged community. There's a couple of screening tools that I have listed there that can be helpful on this end. And then third, describe how the anticipated benefits of the project are going to flow to those disadvantaged and impacted communities. Next slide, please. Best practices here, the Justice 40 criteria that we touched on a little bit earlier in Matea's presentation is super helpful. There's a number of different things that asks that you can kind of address here, including things like decreasing energy burden, how you intend to increase access to low-cost capital if you do, all things to just kind of look at and think about as you're doing this. Also, though, having measuring direct, indirect, and cumulative impacts there, air pollutants, water pollution, ecological impacts, super important. A question that I get a lot here is, what if there are no people or disadvantaged communities living near the project? And I always just stress to think really holistically about this. Maybe you can, maybe there's a nearby disadvantaged community that you can partner with to offer job training and job access opportunities. You know, additionally, there might be community organizations or universities in those communities that you can partner with here. Also thinking about things like your supply chain, where are you purchasing from? What are the impacts there? As well as things like waste streams, you know, additional opportunities there. So it's really just thinking very broadly about what it means to benefit disadvantaged communities, whether or not your project's located in one. And then next slide, please. Awesome. So I want to be quick here. We can get to questions, but one recommendation we got that people thought would be helpful was just looking at a few of the specific project examples. Like there's obviously the 48C tax credit can fund a number of different things. What exactly does that mean? So I just pulled a couple of examples that were funded in the first round, and you can also find these on the 48C website with DOE. So The first example I have here is JSW Steel in Ohio. So this is an existing facility that is going to purchase equipment that will enable it to produce monopile grade steel slabs that will go into the offshore wind energy market. I think this is just an interesting example of 48C because this is an existing facility that's looking to get into a new segment. And specifically, it's a segment that DOE has said they're prioritizing with investments, including in the next round. So just something to think about there. Next slide, please. The other one is a little bit different. It's Siemens Energy, located. So again, 48C can, re-equip existing facilities, but it can also be used to produce new ones. Again, this is a plant that's going to be producing large power transformers, an area that has dealt with significant domestic shortages in recent years, and the DOE is targeting here. So again, no surprise that this is a project that was funded in that first round. I just want to stress that there's a lot of other examples, incredibly small projects, huge projects that were a piece of this, as well as, additionally, this money can also be used for industrial decarbonization. So reducing your scope 1 emissions, for instance, as we talked about earlier, by 20%. So there's a number of different ways, again, that this funding could be used. Next slide. And awesome. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Elisa. If you have any questions, feel free to reach me offline at the email that's listed there. Thanks all.
Thank you, Tom, Matea, and Lachlan for your great presentations. We'll go into some Q&A now. We have some questions here in the chat, but please, the list is not long, and so get your questions in now. I think the first question probably goes to Tom. Could an organization that works with manufacturing/energy companies submit an application with the intent to distribute the funds to those companies to subsidize their clean energy projects?
Sorry, there's a couple of different parts there. I want to just stress that I'm definitely not a tax expert, so don't want to give you misleading advice there. I think this is one where I would encourage reaching out to DOE on the specifics of especially processes like that, if that makes sense.
I think it's probably pretty unlikely, though. It sounds like someone wants to submit and then distribute the funds to projects. This is very much for specific projects to get funding. So I would say this is likely not the right application for a 48C.
Yes, if you're an organization that works with companies, there's, as I just stressed with community benefit plan piece of this, there's ways to get involved there. But the company itself, is going to need to submit the actual application here. Remembering that this is a tax credit.
And maybe to that end, I don't know if this organization is an economic development, given that this webinar was shared with economic development organizations. How could they, if they can't apply for this funding, how can they assist with their manufacturing and energy company to support them in benefiting from this credit?
Yeah, absolutely. There's really so many ways here, including just connections that you might have, just understanding that companies may not have previously applied to federal funding or put together a plan like this. And there's so many spaces in local government, other planning processes that happen, that's really a chance to get engaged in this process as an economic development organization through the community benefit plan process, but also being able to, host community organizations at your space, hold additional meetings, all ways that you can help these companies strengthen their applications moving forward. As I noted earlier, this is incredibly competitive funding, and anything that you can do to go above and beyond on these sections is really going to help your application stand out.
Thanks, Tom. We have a question here for Lachlan. Lachlan, what sectors does the Clean Growth Tool cover? And also there was one in the chat on timing of when it will be released and made public too.
Great, thank you. In terms of what sectors it covers, the idea is that it covers every sector, so not just manufacturing, but a full range, from renewable energy production, manufacturing of upstream segments, all the way through to various professional services related to clean energy. And so what we did was took WTO data on green goods, OECD data on green patents, and crosswalked that to every industry in the NICE system. And so the Clean Growth tool uses that crosswalk to be able to provide feasibility analysis for the entire clean energy economy, which, as far as we can tell, is the first time that there's been a full mapping of the entire sort of NICE code system. And so we think that's a pretty exciting kind of application of the tool, because it really leverages the full range of existing strengths in a given region, and not just those specific to let's say clean tech manufacturing. In terms of the release of the tool, where it's a little bit flexible right now, because we've been in talks with reporters to perhaps release specific segments of the tool in online media outlets, and so it sort of depends on the results of those discussions. But we can certainly keep this group updated, or feel free to email me if you want to know exactly when that launch happens. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Lachlan. Here's a question for Matea. You talked a lot about energy communities, and there were a lot of definitions in there. How can I be sure a project is in an energy community?
Yeah, thank you so much, Eliza. Well, yeah, as I said, the best way that you can make sure your project checks all of those boxes is to go to the official DOE list, which is listed in Appendix C of one of their official notices that we've dropped into the chat. And if you do that, you're going to have to do this quite rigorous cross-checking, which I was mentioning before, where you're basically going to look up your project's 11-digit Federal Information Processing Series code. You're going to have to make sure that that's rooted in the 2020 census boundaries. And then you're going to cross-check it with that handy-dandy Appendix C list, which goes through and basically shows census tract by census tract what qualifies. And if it's on there, great. I will also share that DOE has some really useful FAQs related to the energy community census tract boundary issues. So for example, like one question that I saw in there was, if your census tract is adjacent to a coal closure and they touch at a single point, is it still adjacent? And helpfully they say in there, yes, it is. It is still very much able to qualify. So I'd really recommend checking out this DOE FAQ resource as well. It really gets into some of the nuts and bolts there. Thanks, Eliza.
Great, thank you. I'm seeing a new question. I think, Tom, I'll direct this at you. Is the full application similar to a federal grant application?
That's a great question. There are some similarities between the two. As I noted earlier, it's also kind of similar and asks a lot of similar questions to what's in a loan application, which is why DOE is utilizing this information with the Manufacturing Capital Connector program. But there's going to be some other things like additional tax info that are probably not part of a federal grant application, but very similar processes because of the way that it's distributed.
Great, thank you. And then I think this might be the last question. Matea, it's directed at you. What types of manufacturing does the 48C program cover?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Short answer, so many different types of manufacturing. So as you, actually, Eliza, as you were mentioning at the very beginning, so the 48C tax credit essentially offers 3 different types of advanced energy projects. There's the clean energy manufacturing and recycling projects, the critical mineral processing, refining, and recycling projects, and then the industrial decarb projects. And nested within that are a bunch of different types of manufacturing projects. And DOE actually really helpfully has released a list of priority projects for the clean energy manufacturing projects for round 2. You can find this on their website and also in, I believe it's notice 2436. Excuse all of the numbers. But in it, they basically say that there are a bunch of priorities, including clean hydrogen, electric grids, electric heat pumps, EVs, electric vehicles, nuclear energy, solar, wind, and so much more. And so just to make sure that your project is on there, I do recommend looking up the Appendix A of Notice 2436, which will have a really holistic and exhaustive list of what is, what is eligible. Thanks, Eliza.
Thank you. I appreciate your knowledge of the appendix numbers off the top of your head and all those numbers.
So sorry.
Well, with that, I think that's our last question. So thank you to everyone that was able to join. Good luck if you're putting forward a concept note. I'll pass it over to you.
Oh, sorry. Just wanted to make one, quick plug that, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer. Yes, we are not tax advisors, but there's a lot of other pieces on these applications that we are absolutely able to help you with. So again, yeah, please reach out with any questions.
Thank you.